freezing cold this morning. I didn't have my sweater on. I just went out to get my some blood taken because I had my physical with my doctor yesterday and I had to go to the lab to get some blood. And for the first time in my life, they couldn't get blood on my arms. Well, they did eventually, on both arms. You know, life's hard and then you die. But life's not nearly as hard for me as it is for many of my friends and perhaps many of your friends as well. Storms come in life. There are difficult times. My difficulties are just so minor, don't mean anything really in the grand scheme of things. But there are some times when things really get tough for people. Some of my friends are going through some very difficult times, kind of end of life things that we are facing. And, when we go back to breaking through in life into achieving a life that takes you solidly through to the end, you have to build up the muscle for life early in life. And when we look at the training of the 12, as we are looking through and breakthrough pathways, I always put this picture up on my thumbnail. I didn't get the clip moved over here to the right chapter, but we're roughly about so far through the book. And looking at A.B. Bruce's The Training of the 12. It's a classic that's been around for well over 150 years. And some of it I find really stimulating. Some of it I find not so much. I've explained before that I'm redoing it. I'm not really rewriting it. I'm getting artificial intelligence to upgrade the language and putting it together in a shortened form and a longer form as well. And we'll be printing that by the end of the year. And I'm really pleased to be able to do that because it's been out of print since quite some time. The last printing that I found, this one is from 1971. And yet many pastors have it still on their shelf from way back in the day when we used it as a kind of a training guide. But, I'm not sure that it helps actually get us to get out of our heads and into our lives and working with people. When Jesus picked the 12, he took them with him on field tests. And I think that that's one of the key things that we've missed. We tend to kind of sit around and talk about it rather than get out there and work shoulder to shoulder, doing things and facing surprise difficulties in life. And I think that that's a really important thing that's happening. Richard Fleming and I haven't had him on the podcast yet. We'll get to that. But we've been putting this book together that we call Breakthrough Pathways, and it's almost ready for publication. It will be in the next few days, but don't shoot me if it doesn't make it out by next week and available. And we're excited about it because what we've done is we've assembled a list of things that we know make a difference in a person's life, particularly a young man's life who might be tuned to head towards ministry. And we've got these 13 different things that we do. You've heard of them all, but we've kind of put them all together and written some short chapters on the why and the how to make it happen. One of the things that we've got built in there is field tests. We have what we call quests, which are, you'd call them a lesson if you like, but it's bigger than a lesson because we're actually taking it out of the classroom and into the field. It's not really, taking rockets to Mars or anything like that. It's doing things like having conversations with people you would not otherwise be likely to have conversations with, or serving in ways that you wouldn't otherwise be likely to serve. Now, when we come to the training of the 12, and we look at this particular chapter in surviving a storm, it's helpful for us to understand that these disciples were all men in a boat who were used to being in a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee. They were used to being on the Sea of Galilee. Most of Jesus' public ministry, with the exception of the final week events of the final week of Jesus' life on earth before the crucifixion, happened in Galilee, in the Galilee area. It's It's this lake that was 13 miles long, 6 miles wide, and it's in a basin. It's actually 650 or 700 feet below sea level, which is really quite fascinating because it flows out of the river all down the Jordan River into the Dead Sea, which is even lower than sea level. And so it's very kind of deep embedded in the topography in the we call the Holy Land. And this sea, it's a lovely little sea, but we would use the word lake because that's really all it is. Sometimes it's good. The Bible called it lake as well. But it is kind of in a basin. And generally speaking, there's hills called mountains. I guess you'd call them a mountain, 1,000, 2,000 feet high in places around the lake. And because it's in this basin and it's very hot and tropical down near the lake, but very nice and breezy up at the top. You get a bit of a wind thing happening that stirs up the lake rather unpredictably for the people, and that's caused by the temperature change. So these people who live in that area, they were used to that. They were used to the idea that if they want to cool off, they'd have to climb up the hill to do so. And it was all part of their life. Now, there are two occasions where we have Jesus stilling storms that are recorded for us in the Gospels. The one that we're not going to build on today, or from this chapter that A.B. Bruce has, is not that which happens where you have Jesus sleeping in the boat and the storm comes up and Jesus commands the storms and stills them. That's not the one we're focusing on today. The other one is this one. Well, the first one was recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but not in John. And the second one was recorded in Matthew and Mark, but not in Luke and in John. And it's really, John becomes, I think, the anchor passage. So you've got to bear in mind that when we're looking at the Gospels, Matthew and John were the two that actually were there. They walked with Jesus. Mark probably took his information mostly from Peter. And Luke was the one who came along later, outside of the originals, and was much more oriented, like we would think in terms of a historian today, giving us often built-in details. It's curious that in this particular event, Luke doesn't pick it up in his gospel. I can't tell you why. It's just the way it is. But what we got here is in this particular storm on the Sea of Galilee, Jesus has fed the 5,000. They want to rise up and make him king. He kind of escapes out of there, I presume, while the disciples clean. And he tells them to go across the Sea of Galilee, that 6 mile from over on this side. They got to go back over to, it doesn't come to me, south of Capernaum, 6 miles across the lake. And this violent storm arises, and they are really threatened in their life. Now, this boat's like, I think, about 18 feet long, and there's a dozen in them. So it's a dozen of them in the boat. It's a typical fishing boat. It's not a large yacht. And Jesus has gone away because he doesn't want to be taken by the crowd and trying to force him into something that he has no interest in and becoming an earthly king. And he's gone up into the mountain. One of the Gospels, two of the three Gospels say that he's praying up in the mountains. It's nighttime. It's difficult. It's actually about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're caught in this fierce storm halfway across the lake. They've been rowing this boat. I don't know how many oars they'd have. They've been rowing this boat across the lake to get to the other side, and they're not making much headway. The wind is blowing them back and so on. And they're scared to death, and they're tired. And Jesus, it's so bizarre from a human perspective. Jesus, who is purely human, comes to them. Now, we don't have evidence of Jesus kind of appearing and disappearing and, levitating and doing things like that. In his humanity, he's walking on water. Now, I can only do that when it's frozen. And probably you're the same. You've got some special skill. He goes to them out in the water. Now, he's been up in the mountain. He's coming down. He sees them apparently struggling. He sees them out there. I'm not sure it says that or not. Yeah. But he obviously knows they're out there. And he walks out on the water. Mark has a curious thing, which he quite possibly picked up from Peter, who was in the boat. Peter didn't write. Mark probably wrote down his stuff. And Mark says that Jesus kind of walked by as if he was going to pass by the boat. I don't know if that's because he didn't want to startle them or what it was. It's just an interesting little fact that I guess Peter was saying, wait a minute, dude, is that the ghost or what's out there? Who is that? What's going on? And Jesus says, don't be afraid. It's I. It's me. I am. Now, would you think it rather unusual if you were out on a lake and it was in the middle of the night and the waves were all bouncing up and down? I could think maybe 6-foot waves. And you see somebody walking in the water. I think that's a pretty scary event for them. And they were really, really upset in that circumstance. Now, Jesus had gone and he was apparently praying up on the mountain, and he'd seen his disciples struggling, and he cared about them. Now, in the other case where Jesus calms the storm, he's actually sleeping in the back of the boat. But in this case, he's not in the boat. He sent them out on their own. That's why I love this concept of being out, putting your mentees out there in the field by themselves to solve things. Somehow, when you're at the door with them, even if they're doing the talking, you're standing behind them, they feel that extra support. But when they're on their own, they're in trouble. So you got to do things with people, and you've got to also get them to go and do it on their own. And very seldom are people willing to get out there and do it on their own. So anyway, Jesus is gone. The disciples are out there. They're doing what they'd done before. They're not all fishermen, but they certainly are all familiar with the sea and it's the situation that would face. And they're struggling their way in the boat. I wish we had records, and I don't really, but it would be curious if we had a record of what the conversation was like in the boat. Where is Jesus when we need him? I can imagine one of them saying, like, what's the point? They've just forgotten. He's fed the 5,000. They've forgotten that he's taking care of them. It's so often true. Jumping out, A.B. Bruce, and my own concepts here. It's so easy for us to not see that Jesus is with us and that he's there and he's ready to take care of us. Anyway, so is there a symbolism involved in here? Bruce presses on the symbolism. I hesitate on symbolisms because they might be true, but were they intended to be true? When the gospel writers wrote it, did they intend us to see these events symbolically? I am less sure of that. But I am sure that we can see it this way if it's helpful for us, even if it wasn't intended that way. This event, in this case, happened about 3 o'clock in the morning, just before dawn. It's dark and it's difficult and they don't know the way. And I think that this story of Jesus taking care of the disciples in the dark, in the middle of the storm, is something that we can take courage from, that we understand the character of Jesus, that he's ready to care for us in the storm. He'd already let them row halfway across the lake until their resources were totally depleted and they were just out of gas. And I think that sometimes, and I've faced this, and I face it more often than I wish, just sometimes feel like I don't have the energy to take it one more step, one more way forward. And that day will come, and it will come sooner than later. The days ahead of me are much fewer than the days behind me, unless something really miraculous happens in medical science. And There are times when I had more bravado when I was young, but I have to kind of stir myself up to keep going forward uh, in my old age. And you'll be that way too. Uh, you don't depend so much on the hormones that, the dopamine and the endorphins that there's over 60 of them that they've identified now that run around in your brain that give you the energy and the motivation to do things. You're going to have to drill down deeper than the feelings of life. And whether it feels good or not, you're going to have to do the right thing, even when it's difficult in the middle of the storm. Jesus was absent. And there are times in life when you will recognize that Jesus seems to be absent in your life. And was this event symbolic of that for the disciples? I don't know, but it works for me. That these situations where Jesus just doesn't seem to be doing what you'd think he would do and pull you out of the situation, and you got one foot in the boat and the other on the dock. You don't know what to do, whether to push forward or whether to quit. You're not seeing any progress. And struggles can feel like you're standing still in life. But as long as you're not laying down, as long as you're not quitting, you're actually not standing still. At least that's my perspective on it. I can't remember exactly what A.B. Bruce said on the subject, but I think that it is valid for us to take some courage and comfort in applying some of these biblical stories in a symbolic way. Now, what Jesus was definitely doing, he was preparing these weak disciples. And there were many tests that they faced over and over and difficulties. And he was going to rescue them. And he knew that this was a probability. I don't know whether he had the foreknowledge when he sent them off on the boat that this is going to be a stormy night. I tend to think he didn't access that supernatural kind of information, but that he worked totally in a human realm with his disciples. They thought it wasn't real, and they couldn't figure it out when he was walking on the water. The fears that they experienced were probably fears similar to what happened at the time of the crucifixion. And we say he was crucified on Good Friday and he rose again on Easter. But there's a Saturday in there. There's a Sabbath day in there. And we have nothing in the scriptures that tell us anything about that quiet day. And it was a Sabbath day. And these were Jewish men who had lived their life with the faithfulness of being attached to the Hebrew traditions and religion. And it may have been that they went to the synagogue. We don't know. We don't know what they did that Saturday. But we know that it was all quiet. And there are times when you're going to face times in life when things are quiet. Now let's look at Peter for a bit here. He's in the boat. He impulsively says, "Let me walk on the water to you." There was no purpose in him walking on the water that we know of. Jesus was coming towards them. We don't know how far he was, but I think maybe 50 feet away from him. And Peter jumps out of the boat to walk on the water for Jesus. He could have waited him to get there, but Peter was impulsive. And so he started to walk on the water, and then he got reasonably scared and stopped looking at Jesus, and he sank. And then in humility he said, "Lord, save me." He recognized again that he was dead in water, literally, if Jesus didn't save him. Peter learned a lot of lessons, as the early disciples did, through failure. And I think you can see that Jesus, in training the 12, was working with them from the perspective of men who were very ordinary men, who were going to fall and fail, and he would let them fail. And that's hard sometimes when you're working with somebody and they let you. You know they're going to fail, and they think they can do it, and you have to let them fail sometimes and be there to pick them up. Now, sometimes never. The people don't survive the fall. They keep replaying it in their mind and go back to it and say, "I'm such a failure, I can never succeed." These disciples had to learn to fight through all this because Jesus did know. We know this for sure, that Jesus did know that his sacrifice was coming. That's why he came. And he knew that he was going to die this death of a criminal. And he knew that these guys needed to build up their spiritual strength and muscle. What was this all about? This was a serious testing. They were in the boat, not on the dock. I appreciate the fact that they were in the boat and Peter, overstepping himself, wanted to get out of the boat so he could walk on the water. And if you want to walk on the water in life, you got to get out of the boat. You got to take some risks. There's serious testing that's going to happen in your life. And you need to put yourself in situations where you're not sure as to how it will work out for you. If you want to have this experience of God working in you, you got to try some things that you may fail at. And the failures are really not a loss if you don't treat them as a loss. They're a testing. Some people, so many lose and quit. I've said this before, and I say it again because it is always worth repeating. We have so many people who have dropped out. I can't keep track of all the people that came up through Bible college with me and how they went. We had, I think, an exceptional amount of people stay in ministry. But I know that my sons both never graduated, but went to Bible college. Most of their contemporaries fell away. Some totally falling away into a kind of a marinating in kind of an agnosticism and uncertainty, not exactly denying the Lord, but certainly not living for him, not really figuring out that Jesus would be there with you in the storms of life if you let him. You have to actually give him the opportunity. That's what was going on here. In order to live life properly, we've got to understand that surprises are to be expected. There was a song way back in the 90s by a band, they were a Canadian band, the Crash Test Dummies. And it is a line in the song, everything seems planned out, everything seems nicely planned out, and the human race is going to smack your face. I am going to guarantee you, I'll give you personal money back guarantee you, if you want to serve Jesus, the human race is going to smack your face. There are going to be times when people let you down. There are going to be times where you are so surprised the person that you admired so much was actually a double-minded person. They had a double life. You're going to see some of those going forward. Then it ought to knock you out of the saddle. Yes, it's difficulty. Failures are not permanent unless you let them be permanent. Failures are not final. You can pick yourself up and you can be of use, maybe use in a different way than you used to be, but useful nonetheless. It is still true today as it was true then that Jesus saves, and Jesus will save you. So looking at it from the other side, if you say, well, I want to be like Jesus, that means that you're going to be somebody who helps in the time of storms. When people either jump in a pit or get pushed in a pit or fall in a pit, somebody needs to help them through the storms. And I know because I have talked to so many who are in storms, and I find out and I phone them up and I say, how you doing? And they say, nobody cares, nobody calls. That's the way it is, folks. But don't you be that way. You be the one who gets out there and walks on the water to meet the boat in the middle of the ocean to help the person through the storms. And sometimes they'll accept the help and sometimes they won't. And sometimes you're going to have extraordinary patience because people are going to say, well, okay, I'll stand up, I'll do this, and then they won't. And you're going to have to stay on their case, and eventually you're going to have to set them aside until they decide they want to follow. But it will be repetition of patience and losses and trials and struggles. That is the way it is always going to be. I think it's so important for us to be the people who say, I've been let down. I've been slandered. I've been libeled. I've heard words I never read in the Bible. Who sang that song way back in the day? See, these songs are there. These old songs from way back there. But there is also embedded within me the scripture that I memorized, that I put into my soul early on. Maybe I certainly could have spent more time doing it than I did. It's harder and harder for me to remember things today. For goodness sake, I can't for people's names anymore. But, you know, those things that are deep down in my soul, it's not just songs from the secular realm. There's songs that I learned from the spiritual realm about a deep settled peace in my soul. And I can attest that I have that deep settled peace. Yes, it's troublesome sometimes. And yes, people let you down, and people that you invest in are going to walk away. And when they walk away, they're going to turn and slander you. They're going to say you were the problem. People don't want to accept responsibility for their own failure. You're not going to be the best counselor. You're not going to be the best mentor in their mind. And you can always be better than you are, just like I can. But people are going to let you down. I hear so often people who say, well, I'd do ministry if people would join me on the team. Get over it. They're not likely to come and join you on the team. Well, some will eventually. But you got to be the leader. You see, like in a different back, pulling a dog team, pulling a sleigh. If you're not the leader, the view is always the same. Just look what the leader. And if you are the leader, then you set the pace. The speed of the leader is the speed of the pack. And God is asking some who are watching this to stand up and say, for once in my life, I am going to take the stand. I am going to be the leader. I'm going to get out there. And by God's grace, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it out of arrogance. I'm going to do it from a perspective of humility, like these disciples have to learn in these stormy days on the Sea of Galilee. Yeah, that feels better. A little ran off my chest. But it's so true that it's time. It's time for people to take on the challenge of serving the Master in the lovingest way that they possibly can and helping others who are going to let you down and going to fail. Make sure that you do it for the glory of Jesus. Now, if you want to help others do it, you can get involved with Breakthrough Pathways. We're looking for some test churches to work with right now, to work with the 13 pathways we've identified to help galvanize new leaders to rise up, new who are not necessarily young, they could be old, but to get them to rise up, to make a difference in their life. And come to the website, breakthroughpathways.org, and down at the bottom there's a little button. It's actually a big button. Yeah. Click on that and it'll send an email to both Richard and I and ask your questions. See what we can do to get a dialogue going that maybe we can help you help others.
The church is at a crossroads. Attendance is down, communities are disconnected, and many wonder what's next. At Breakthrough Pathways, we believe the answer isn't in more programs or professionals. It's in you, ordinary people making a real difference.
So aim us lives every Thursday at 10 a.m. for real conversation, real solution, and a renewed vision for the future of the church. Let's build something that lasts. Subscribe today and be part of the breakthrough.
And pass it on to other people. Would you please? Would you take this lesson and the other lessons in the series? There's 12 of them. There's 40 more to go. And share some of them, if not all of them, with some others. That's one little thing that you can do. You know, you can watch a baseball game. It's the opening of our season here in Toronto today, this afternoon, and maybe I'll see a couple of innings that ball game. But that's not important. Well, it's important from a refreshing standpoint. What's important is that we raise up leaders who will reach out to others to save lost people in the middle of their storms in life, in their stormy sea. So I hope you'll pass this video on, this channel on to others, and subscribe and hit like and do whatever you can. That helps other people find us. And when you do, it may make a difference in one or two people's lives. But you got to hit up on 20 before it'll help with one. That's about the ratio we usually see. So, see you next week. Same time, same place.